broader vision of school success that extends beyond traditional measures such as standardized test scores. States must use at least one such indicator, like measures of student engagement, school climate or safety, or access to advanced coursework in tracking school success. Now I'll be talking about the learning objectives that we hope to achieve through this webinar. We hope that you will have a better understanding of, one, AAPI priorities with regards to ESSA, opportunities for AAPI stakeholder engagement, and lastly, good stakeholder engagement, what it looks like and why it matters. Here's our agenda for this webinar. First, I will be discussing the purpose of this webinar, why does this matter, and next we will have Monica Tamarath from the National Education Association give us a brief introduction to the Every Student Succeeds Act. Then the rest of the CAPAL interns will also discuss the Virginia, District of Columbia, and Maryland state plans and analyze the different state plans and how they do with regards to the 3 AAPI issues that we identified: data disaggregation, English learners, and school quality. Then we will provide opportunities for engagement and examples of what stakeholder engagement has looked like thus far. Now we will have a poll question just to get a sense of who's here in the room. The question is, have you ever been a room parent or been involved in the PTA? Select one of the following, yes or no. Great, it looks like we have all of the responses in. It appears that no one has been a room parent or involved in the PTA, which is completely okay. There are a lot of opportunities for education policy engagement, and they are not limited to parents, but are also relevant to all stakeholders, including community members, students, and people who just generally care about the education of children. We have another poll question ready for you. So please answer yes or no if you are a significant figure in an elementary, middle, or high school student's life. And we'll give you all some time to answer. And the results are in. 67% of attendees said yes, they are a significant figure in an elementary, middle, or high school student's life, and 33% said no. Thank you for participating in this poll. If you are a significant figure in a student's life, or if you know a student, it is important to understand what is happening in education policy, and we will be discussing this further. During the agenda portion of this webinar, I said that we were going to talk about the purpose. So why get involved in education policy in your local community? Well, it takes a village to raise a child. Similarly, schools, these places of growth and learning for children, are collaborative efforts. Whether you are a school parent who chaperones field trips to museums, or a professional who shares your work at the school's career fair, you are part of this collaborative community effort to educate children. ESSA, by shifting accountability standard provisions to the states, recognizes that local and state education policy really is the heart of education policy. Also, ESSA requires stakeholder input, recognizing that students and parents know what they need from schools better than anyone else. We hope that this webinar will not only provide you with concrete suggestions to support schools and drive education policy at the local level, but also see it as key to bettering the education experience of students in your community. Now I will hand it over to Monica Tamarath, who we are very privileged to have here with us today. She is currently a senior liaison in the Community Advocacy and Partnership Engagement Department at the National Education Association.
Great. Thank you so much. So as Anna mentioned, I currently work at the National Education Association, a union that represents over 3 million educators across the country. One of the main priorities at NEA is advocating for great public schools for every student, so that Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, and how it's implemented is really important to us and our members. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of ESSA and give some context about the current state of ESSA. If we were in a room together, I would ask you all to raise your hand if you've ever heard of the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, before this webinar. Probably not many of you would raise your hand. I could also ask if anyone has ever heard of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, or ESSA, before this webinar, and probably not many of you would raise your hand either. However, if I asked you if you've ever heard of No Child Left Behind, or NCLB, or NICLB, more of you would probably raise your hand. I say this to let you all know that all three bills are actually the same, just different reauthorizations or versions of each other. So in terms of an ESSA overview, the first one that I want to talk about is the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which is ESSA. It was passed in 1965 as part of the United States President Lyndon B. Johnson's War on Poverty, and has been the most far-reaching federal legislation affecting education ever passed in the U.S. Congress. This act was an extensive statute that funded primary and secondary education. It also emphasized equal access to education and establishes high standards and accountability. No Child Left Behind, passed in 2001, reauthorized the act above. This particular reauthorization set a high emphasis on standards-based education reform, with the premise behind this testing centralization and establishing measurable systems in order to improve student education trajectory. This was also the first time that we disaggregated student achievement data by race, special needs, and English language learner status. While this bill was supposed to be reauthorized within 5 years, or in 2006, criticism from the right, left, and center had accumulated so much that reauthorization actually did not happen until 2015. In 2015, the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, replaced its predecessor, the No Child Left Behind Act. This act modified but did not eliminate provisions relating to the periodic standardized tests given to students. As Anna mentioned earlier during the key term section, the bill also returns a lot of power on the specifics of K-12 education back to states and in turn local communities, as well as requires states and state superintendents to engage with education stakeholders like parents, students, and advocates. The current state of ESSA. So where are we in the process of implementation? You can imagine that this very large piece of federal legislation has a pretty long and big implementation process, which actually is kind of up in the air given the current political climate as well. But this kind of timeline gives you a little bit of where folks want to be. So, for example, December 2015, ESSA was signed into law by President Obama, and it was sent to the Department of Education for regulation. In April 2017, the first official deadline for states to submit their ESSA plans to the U.S. Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, for approval. As of April 14th, 10 states and the District of Columbia had turned in their plans to the federal government, according to the U.S. Department of Education. July and August 2017, Virginia public comment is the Virginia public comment deadline. August 2017, DC will hopefully receive feedback from the Department of Education on their submission. And September 2017, Virginia and Maryland submissions are due.
Thank you, Anna and Monica. Again, I'm Camille, and I will be looking at the state of Virginia. I just wanted to quickly go over the demographics of Virginia to give you some context of where Virginia is at in relation to other states. So here I have some pie charts of the racial breakdown of Virginia students versus US students. And of enrolled students in Virginia, 7% are Asian Pacific Islander, which is actually 2% percentage points higher than US students overall. Virginia also has 5 counties with a higher percentage of AAPI students compared to Virginia overall. The highest is Loudoun County with over 20%, which is actually higher than any county in Maryland. In Virginia, the Asian population is also the second fastest growing immigrant population behind Hispanics and Latinos. When I go over Virginia state plans, you'll find that they may not adequately serve the counties that have high AAPI student populations. In this chart here, you can see that Virginia is ranked 8th nationwide in terms of enrollment percentages of AAPI students. I just want to flag that Virginia has a higher percentage of AAPIs than both Maryland and DC. With this information, you may think that Virginia should address the needs of AAPI students in a similar way to its peers. Even if compared to Hawaii or California, Virginia's AAPI student population is low. Virginia is still in the top 10 out of all states in terms of percentage of AAPI students. I will now give a brief overview of Virginia State's plan, and I chose these specific points because they are most relevant to the AAPI community. As you saw on the timeline before, Virginia is in its final phases, but comments and feedback are still being accepted for the rest of the summer. Virginia, again, will be submitting a final draft this September. So as a part of its state plans, Virginia has set long-term benchmarks for 4 things: reading and language ability, math ability, absentee rate, and graduation rate. I think what they measure are pretty self-explanatory. These benchmarks are unique for specific subgroups, and you'll be able to see what those groups are on the next slide. Additionally, ESSA required states to identify significantly spoken languages by students other than English within the state and what they considered significant. So Virginia decided to go with whichever languages were spoken by at least 5% of the total English learner population. And apparently only Castilian Spanish and Arabic met that amount. On this slide, you'll see an example of the benchmarks Virginia set and which subgroups they identified: Asian students, Black students, economically disadvantaged students, etc. The numbers in the target years column indicate the percentage of students of a specific group Virginia wants to achieve proficiency level in this example, reading or language ability. So various subgroups have different starting points of proficiency, but as you can see in this chart, in 7 years, Virginia wants at least 75% of each subgroup to be proficient in reading and language. So notice that Asian students are, like white students, shown to meet or exceed long-term goals. While Virginia does look at economically disadvantaged students and English learners, this is a classic case of lumping all the Asian communities together and not taking into account the unique challenges certain Asian groups, like Southeast Asians, for example, face, which we would argue is harmful. For example, in the US overall, less than 30% of the Hmong, Cambodian, and Laotian communities have bachelor's degrees. Furthermore, Pacific Islanders are too small to be designated a subgroup, so they are not even included in these benchmarks. But they also tend to have low educational attainment rates, often even lower than Southeast Asian communities. So why does this matter? If teachers and administrators are assuming that all of their Asian students are doing well because, on average, they meet or exceed long-term goals, then the students' specific needs may not be fulfilled, especially if they are from an Asian community that is historically underserved. Assumptions are pretty powerful and oftentimes can blind people from the truth. Now I'll be looking at English learners. In Virginia, AAPI students make up 19.1% of the English learner student population combined, but not enough speak one language for it to be significant for Virginia's record, which, if you remember, is 5% of the English learner population. Limited English proficient populations who speak an Asian language are definitely not as large a population or as widespread as those who speak Spanish, but they are concentrated in a few counties, including Fairfax, Virginia Beach, and Norfolk. The most popular LEP Asian languages are Korean, Vietnamese, Chinese, and Tagalog. For many countries, Asian languages were second in frequency to Spanish. Unfortunately, I could not find much comprehensive data on English learners, but you'll see in the next slide that I have this data on limited English proficient population. Furthermore, something to note is that Virginia schools do not offer translations of assessments in languages other than English, and as far as I know, they do not intend to. Again, I could not find data on English learners, but here's the visual breakdown of languages spoken by the limited English proficient population in Virginia. You can see Spanish far exceeds any other language in terms of percent of the LEP population. However, the most spoken languages that follow are Asian languages, Korean, Vietnamese, and Chinese. On this slide, I included a chart of Virginia counties with high percentages of LEPs compared to the overall county population. Fairfax, Prince William, and Loudoun counties all also have high percentages of AAPI students, if you remember a few slides back. We would urge Virginia to, when considering which languages are significant, to look at county breakdowns rather than on a state level.
Thank you, Camille. As I mentioned earlier in this webinar, a new part of the ESSA state plans is to choose a school quality factor that goes beyond traditionally academic measures. And Virginia has chosen one measure, chronic absenteeism, which is defined as missing 10% or more of the school year. Their long-term goal for all students and subgroups is 10% rate of chronic absenteeism. We'd like to compare and contrast this with DC and Maryland, because DC has 4 measures for school environment, and Maryland has 3 measures for school quality. And the reason why we'd like to bring this up is because we believe that school climate is important, and the implications that it has for AAPI mental health and academic achievement merits its consideration in the ESSA state plans. We have a few opportunities here for Virginia engagement, and some of them are coming up. One is going to be in August 9th, and another is going to be in August 23rd in Virginia Beach and Mecklenburg County, respectively. Public comment will be accepted at each of these public hearings, and to attend, please RSVP to the Director for Board Relations, Emily Webb. If you cannot attend in person, which is understandable, written comments can also be accepted online, and the link is found on this presentation. Now we will have a testimony from Virginia, because we wanted to show what good stakeholder engagement can look like. This is from a member from OCA Central Virginia chapter, and he says that he went to a meeting in Virginia for ESSA implementation for English language learners and other subgroups in the summer of 2016. He says at the meeting, there was no outreach seen from the state government to the public. So the only way state residents would know about the meetings is if they already knew that they were coming up. He also mentioned that the time of day that it was held at, which prevented many working parents from attending the meeting, because it was held at 2 p.m. There was little to no discussion about the plans because they were presented as already complete. His biggest concern was that the resources and documents provided by the state were only provided in English, so the English language learner community had to rely on advocates that understood English to go on their behalf. We wanted to bring this testimony to light just because we wanted to show what it could be like to attend one of these public hearings that we mentioned as an engagement opportunity. And yes, it's great that ESSA requires stakeholder engagement, but it also has to be meaningful and accessible stakeholder engagement. This member brought up a lot of concerns about outreach, having it at a time when stakeholders such as parents can actually attend, and also making it accessible in terms of language and having it in the languages that these stakeholders actually speak. So hopefully your experience wouldn't be like that if you were to attend, but your presence is also important at these different meetings.
I just wanted to summarize what we presented just now in Virginia. So in summary, Virginia has a relatively large AAPI population percentage-wise. However, its state plans don't address specific needs of specific AAPI communities. There is no data disaggregation that we could find, nor were there specific help targeting AAPI English learners, and there was only one school quality factor when compared to Maryland and DC, where they had multiple school quality factors. So what can you do? You can advocate at a public hearing, school board meeting, or to your administrators or teachers for data disaggregation to see where there are achievement gaps within the community, for language translation for top AAPI languages, for policies that take into account specific counties' needs rather than the needs of the state as a whole, and for more factors measuring school quality, and perhaps a school climate survey.
Thanks, Camille and Anna. I'll start by speaking about DC's demographics. The AAPI population in DC is the lowest, percentage-wise, of the 3 states, such that AAPI is racially categorized as part of other on the DC Board of Education's official website. Thus, it can be politically expedient for the DC Board to not consider AAPI interest unless our community goes out of our way and advocate extensively for our concerns most pertinent to AAPIs. On the other hand, the percentage of English learners in DC that are AAPIs is at least double or likely even triple of that of the overall population percentage of AAPIs. Thus, if it's politically expedient for the DC Board to not consider the interests of AAPI, concerns that affect a significant AAPI English learners population might be ignored if we don't advocate for solutions to those concerns. DC's ESSA plan is in the most advanced stage of all 3 states, since, as Monica mentioned earlier, its plan was only of the 3 that was submitted to the U.S. Department of Education in April. Barring major setbacks, the plan will roll out in the upcoming 2017-2018 school year. However, although the community engagement meetings have commenced and the plan finalized, and despite the plan's aggressive goals toward raising proficiency levels, DC's plan is known to lack specificity about how it will achieve its goals. This is a brief timeline on DC's process on the ESSA plan compilation process. One can see that despite its feedback-seeking and policy-making process being completed in the past 18 months, the next 18 months will continue to be key. This is because DC must design more specific policies to achieve its overgeneral objectives in the state plan. And as mentioned by Camille, the first pertinent issue for the AAPI community is shared by Virginia, the need for data disaggregation. Data disaggregation will certainly help DC raise proficiency levels through serving lower achieving subgroups more adequately, particularly many in the AAPI community. That being said, to give DC credit, it has increased accountability for all subgroups by disaggregating NHPI data from Asian American data, and it has lowered the minimum size of subgroups so that even small subgroups in smaller schools are accounted for. However, even with those advances, the lack of further data disaggregation will hide disparities between diverse groups within a subgroup like AAPI. This means that many AAPI ethnicities will not receive the education help they need, as well as face the consequences of failing to meet unreasonable expectations. The issue was identified by the DC Mayor's Office as early as 2011, but still yet to be discussed in ESSA public meetings. The second issue most pertinent to AAPIs in DC involves reforms on the district's policies toward English learners, where AAPIs make up 10% of the district's English learners population. And the district's aggressive goals for guidelines reform were explicitly laid out in the state plan, as this plans to increase the percent of target meeting English learners from the paltry 46% to the high 85% by 2038. Its open solicitation of suggestions from EL stakeholders also signified its commitment toward further reform, and in the process, incorporated several of their suggestions. However, several reform suggestions were not incorporated in the final plan. For example, stakeholders suggested to set growth expectations that vary by proficiency level, age, grade level, and education level. Instead, they kept a universal growth target that applies the same target to an immigrant at the age of 16 as to a US-born 6-year-old from a non-English speaking family, as long as they score the same on their initial language test. Such a reform on growth expectations will certainly provide more appropriate resources and expectations to different subgroups of English learners. In addition, some incorporated reforms were laid out as vague objectives, requiring extensive input from us stakeholders to develop their implementation, and some were yet to be suggested. I would advise all of us to review the list of reforms that were not adopted or need to be hammered out or yet to be suggested, and suggest them as public comments online or in the next public meeting. The third issue most pertinent to the AAPI community involves DC school quality factors, the most flexible part of the ESSA plan. Unlike Virginia, DC does account for more factors than the average state plan, with chronic absenteeism and other attendance indicators indirectly addressing the racial discrimination toward AAPIs, which is well documented in DC government reports on education. However, we must advocate for more effective accountability measures, such as ratings from school climate studies. And it's not like that DC doesn't see the need for these accountability ratings, as it was the mayor's office that conducted a report on AAPI struggles in education in the first place. But it's that the DC State Board needs input on the technical instrument of these school climate studies. Okay. Now, we have a poll question for all of you. Which of the following is something you have done or are interested in doing to advocate in your local community? Is it stay informed and educate others on the local issues, attend a town hall, volunteer with a local advocacy organization, write a letter to a local representative, or schedule a meeting with local representatives? We'll give you about 30 seconds. Oh, it seems like we have a tie between three choices. So some have attended a town hall, some have volunteered with a local advocacy organization, or scheduled a meeting with local representatives. But it seems like none of us have stayed informed and be able to educate others on local issues, or have written a letter to a local representative. Those are very worthwhile engagement opportunities to be part of. For DC particularly, the most important part is to attend public and working meetings, aka attending a town hall. And the place one can speak about the need to increase school climate studies as an accountability measure is the ESSA Advisory Task Force. One of the primary missions of the task force is to pilot school climate studies and hammer out rating methodologies. For reforms on English learner guidelines, one should attend, or better yet, present at the English Learner Summer Symposium in August of every year, where education experts can guide these educators on English learners' reading and writing strategies. For implementation of school climate studies, of data disaggregation, of English learners' guideline reform, as shadowing vague objectives or reforms that are suggested but not implemented, one can advocate for them at the State Board of Education public meetings that occur twice a month. Take advantage of the low attendance by becoming consistent and influential voices. Again, the three most pertinent issues for the AAPI community in DC are reform on English learner guidelines, the need for data disaggregation, and the need to finalize adding school climate studies as a school quality factor. And the best ways to involve oneself are attending lowly attended public and working meetings, speaking with the ESSA Advisory Task Force, and helping shape the curriculum of the English Learner Summer Symposium.
Thank you, June. And now we'll have a DC testimony from Kim Hall, who is a Civil Rights Fellow from OCA Asian Pacific American Advocates. Kim attended an ESSA focus group, Measures and Accountability System, on Tuesday, October 18, 2016. She says, "I was happy to see the room full of people, but unfortunately, there were only a few people of color and not many parents because of the meeting being held mid-afternoon. There were options put out for discussion on the best way to measure achievement gaps between subgroups, but the language used was relatively inaccessible and was only understandable to those that worked in education policy. There was one parent there that tried to engage with discussion, but he had a hard time understanding the terminology used, and the presentation and data given to us was, again, not broken down in ways that were understandable to community members. Something I did appreciate is that after the meeting, they make the presentation materials accessible online. which is great, and are very open to feedback or listening to concerns after the meeting over email. Like the previous testimony, Kim brings up a lot of concerns about the accessibility of these different meetings that are meant to engage stakeholders in ESSA implementation, but she does bring up some positive things, which is the accessibility of the presentation materials online, so that community members can continue to engage with a discussion, regardless of whether or not they are present at that meeting.
Thanks, Anna. And now moving on to the state of Maryland, where Michelle and I will be talking about the ESSA state plans there, as well as the data disaggregation and the LAP population. So as you can see, this is the Asian American population of Maryland. Maryland is approximately 6% Asian, which is one of the lower states in the United States of America. But here is a brief breakdown of that Asian American population. So we have Chinese, Filipino, Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, other Asian, and Asian Indian. As you can see, other Asian is 15.7%, which is a fairly large portion of this population. So if we could have further disaggregation of this chunk of the population, it would be extremely beneficial to both the state as a whole and to school districts. And now we go into a county by county breakdown. And as you can see, it just shows you what percent of that county is Asian American. It doesn't go into any further disaggregation. And so counties are extremely important to school districts because every school district is unique. Counties with larger AAPI populations like Howard, Montgomery, and Baltimore could benefit from further disaggregation. As Camille said, a lot of Asian American communities are very different and they're not all the same. Southeast Asian communities are historically underserved, and so if we found that a county turns out to be mostly Korean American, we would have very different needs from that county that turns out to be, let's say, mostly Laotian American. On the next slide, we have the LAP population of Maryland. And so this isn't the state population, but rather what portion of Maryland's LAP population this group is. And so I've included Spanish because it is the most spoken in that population. And then after that, we have all of the potential AAPI languages. And so we were really fortunate to find this data from the Migration Policy Institute, and it goes all the way down to 31 with Laotian, which only has 500 speakers, but was still included in this data. And so we were really happy to see that. That being said, so this is a visual representation of the data we just saw. That being said, although Chinese and Korean are AAPI languages present at over 5%, which is what Maryland considers to be significant, and significant in this sense means that tests and important documents would be translated within the school district. And so Spanish is the only one that's present at a state K through 12 school population at 5.8. Even though within the LAP population, it's over 50%. And so the bottom line is that if we disaggregate data based on county by county and based on the portion of the LAP population and not the state population, we would have much more specific data and we would be able to tailor a school district's needs based on all that information. And so even though statewide AAPI LAPs may not meet that significance threshold, they may meet it in certain counties. As you can see, counties like Anne Arundel and Howard County have a significant Korean LAP population with 11.3% and 23.3%. And then in Montgomery County in Baltimore City, there's a large portion of Chinese LAPs with 11.4 and 7.8. So although we don't have data on the statewide K through 12 population, there are counties with a significant amount of LAPs in a certain demographic. And so if the school district could tailor their curriculum and provide more services for these populations, it would be greatly beneficial. And next, Michelle is going to talk about Maryland's ESSA plan.
Thank you, Maki. Now that we have a general breakdown of APIA demographics in Maryland, let's move forward on to why the ESSA plan should be important to stakeholders. So I'm sure you're all wondering where Maryland is now in the implementation process. So the ESSA legislation was signed by President Obama in December of 2016. And after 16 months of research and outreach by the Maryland Department of Education, Maryland submitted the draft plan to the governor for approval just last month in June of 2017. So this most recent plan is publicly accessible on Maryland's Board of Education website. Because Maryland's ESSA plan is in phase 2 of its draft, the majority of the policy is already written. However, there are still important areas that need stakeholder commentary before the final plan is submitted in September of 2017. Key aspects we would like stakeholders to focus on include English language learners in the ESSA plan, which Maki just spoke about, and school quality and accountability indicators, which I will talk about now. So, in all ESSA plans are accountability indicators, which measure the level of school success. They set into place targets for schools and systems and outline assistance programs for schools that are not meeting the standards. In Maryland's ESSA plan, accountability measures align to school improvement efforts in order to provide more equal opportunities for all students. Through this plan, by simplifying the current accountability system and its related school and local school system improvement programs, both educators and parents will gain a better understanding of how well schools are functioning. So as listed in this graphic, here are the required measures of accountability at each level of education. Indicators for elementary and middle school include academic achievement, academic progress, English language proficiency, and school quality and student success. Indicators for high school are the same, but also include the highlighted areas in red, which are graduation rates and readiness for post-secondary success. So on the next slide, we have a pie chart pulled from information provided by the Maryland School Department of Education to further break down how accountability measures are in effect. So academic achievement accounts for 20% and is measured by proficiency on English language, arts, and mathematics. Academic progress is measured by 2 factors in elementary and middle school, and those are 25% for growth for English language, arts, and mathematics, and also 10% for completion of a well-rounded curriculum. English language proficiency is at 10%. This leaves the last category, which is outlined in red, which are school quality factors. As previously explained by Anna and Camille, school quality factors are the non-academic areas a school is measured on. Maryland is actually a leader in the DMV area for school quality factors, and in the Maryland ESSA plan, the measures of school quality and student success include chronic absenteeism, which makes up for 15% and is defined as more than 20 days of unexcused absences within a 30-day period. Measures of opportunities and access for students to obtain a well-rounded curriculum, which accounts for a total of 10%. And for K through 5th grade students, it's defined as enrollment in science, social studies, fine arts, physical education, and health. For 6th through 8th grade students, it's defined as enrollment in fine arts, physical education, health, and computational learning. That leaves us with the final accountability factor and measure of school success, which is the climate survey that accounts for 10%. The Maryland School Department of Education included this climate survey as it aims to provide a variety of programs and practices to promote a positive school climate. And strategies might include providing positive support systems to students and anti-bullying interventions, both of which are key to reduce incidents of bullying and harassment, and definitely help promote students' academic achievement, mental health, and overall school success. So the climate survey that Maryland School Department of Education is trying to implement is contracted out to a third party to provide an objective evaluation of school quality that is reflective of students and their parents' experiences. On the next slide is the breakdown for high school measures, which is very similar. So again, academic achievement, 20%, ELT, 10%. And then there's the 3 graduation measures that include readiness for post-secondary success at 10%, completion of a well-rounded curriculum at 10%, and cumulative cohort graduation rate at 15%. The measures of school quality and student success are again highlighted in red and are also pretty similar to the elementary middle school indicators. So chronic absenteeism at 15% in a climate survey at 10%. The factors that fulfill the opportunities and access to a well-rounded curriculum category have changed and now reflect the high school progress levels. So that includes the percentage of students graduating or exiting high school with a certificate of program completion, whether or not there are students enrolling in advanced placement or international baccalaureate courses, and also participation in dual enrollment or completion of a career in technical education concentration. So all of these school accountability indicators are integral to evaluate each school system in order to build a better learning environment for students and help promote educational, academic achievement, mental health, and overall school success. And we want to highlight that it's important for stakeholders to read through to understand these measures and submit any comments they have for improvement, as the ESSA plan directly affects the future of children in their APIA community. So with all of this background information on the Maryland ESSA plan, what can you as Maryland stakeholders do to provide feedback on the plan? Well, the ESSA plan is due on September 18th of 2017. And that leaves stakeholders with only 8 more weeks to engage with state policymakers. So forums of further engagement include the Maryland Department of Education Stakeholder Committee meetings, which are open to the public and meet approximately every 2 months. They're from 9:30 to 11:30 a.m. in the State Boardroom of Maryland State Department of Education. And the meeting times or the meeting dates in 2017 and 2018 are listed on the screen. The most important of these dates is August 24th, as it is the only remaining stakeholder meeting before the plan is submitted in September. So we encourage stakeholders to go to this meeting if you have any comments or concerns regarding the ESSA plan. In addition to this in-person meeting and the subsequent meetings after the plan is submitted, the Maryland State Department of Education has provided a stakeholder feedback survey for the draft plan of Maryland State ESSA plan, and that can be, you can access that through the link on this slide. So this is the last opportunity for the public to directly comment on the draft plan before it's submitted to the U.S. Department of Education. And the draft plan and the survey are important for stakeholders to read and give feedback on, as they affect issues important to APIA stakeholders, such as funding for after-school programs, funding for English language learning programs, and also the areas of teacher accountability and educator effectiveness, amongst other issues. Now, Anna will present a testimony from the Maryland stakeholder on why engagement and advocacy is important.
Thank you, Michelle. While the previous 2 testimonies were from members of advocacy organizations, this one comes from Rahila Ahmed, a local elected official. She is the District 5 representative from Prince George's County Board of Education in Maryland. We were able to speak with her, and in response to our questions about what stakeholder engagement means to her, she said, "To me, stakeholder engagement is integral to representation as a local elected leader. I've paved my way to this school board position through grassroots efforts, and I feel the most effective officials are the ones that are actively working with their community to address issues, solve problems, and envision for the future. What that looks like is meeting people where they are at, going to them versus expecting them to come to you. In this way, you capture a wider understanding of the issues at hand. Engagement can include social media interaction, event participation, forum execution, mailing, etc. I'm looking at implementing innovative ways for stakeholder engagement in my community, like app development for community input and polling. When we asked her about the AAPI community that she represents, she responded, "The AAPI community is quite small in the district I represent. In this way, it's difficult to understand the specific issues of the community and advocate or find advocates that can speak to the issues. However, through my experiences with the school system, I'd say one challenge for AAPI students is finding comparable, competitive career and internship opportunities as the AAPI students in surrounding districts, like Montgomery and Howard County, where the AAPI population is greater. AAPI community members can help to identify and circulate such opportunities to AAPI students in Prince George's County." Rahila echoes the same concerns that the previous two testimonies had about accessibility and the importance of meeting people where they are at. But she also emphasizes the importance of community members to show up and also voice their concerns. Both of these things are significant to good stakeholder engagement.
Thank you, Anna, for providing us with the perspective of a school board member who is a strong advocate for the API community and for increased stakeholder engagement. So for a general summary of the ESSA in the state of Maryland, Maryland will be submitting its ESSA plan in September of 2017. And within the state's draft plan, Maryland is a leader in the DMV area and including school quality evaluations, for accountability indicators like school climate, chronic absenteeism, and opportunities and access to a well-rounded curriculum. While Maryland has satisfactory policies in some areas, there are further areas for improvement. Maryland needs your advocacy for policies that affect English language learners in the state of Maryland. Pushing for limited English proficiency data to be analyzed by percentage of limited English proficiency data and not by percentage of state population is important, as API languages like Korean and Chinese would then be more significant under the ESSA plan, especially in certain counties. Maryland also needs your help in constructing a more robust school climate survey. As mentioned by Anna previously, school climate is crucial as it affects API mental health and contributes to students' comfort and academic success. You can advocate for these areas and more areas that you're concerned about by reaching out to local and state level officials, such as school board members or policymakers. You can also directly contact state policymakers at the Stakeholder Committee meeting on August 24th. We encourage Maryland stakeholders to reach through the draft plan, fill out the stakeholder feedback survey, and advocate for issues such as data disaggregation and English learning programs and more robust school quality factors, as these issues directly impact the future of students in the Maryland school system.
Thank you, Anna and Michelle. I will summarize the ESSA plans of all three states and what needs to be done. All three states vary in demographic, stage of plan proposal, and issues of concerns to the AAPI community. Virginia needs your advocacy for data disaggregation, as non-disaggregated data prevents higher need subgroups of AAPIs from receiving the service they deserve, as well as set unreasonable expectations for those subgroups. It also needs your advocacy on translation services for the English learners family, as well as more nuanced school quality factors. DC is very ambitious in its proficiency targets for English learners and for increasing accountability for currently defined subgroups. However, it lacks specificity on the instruments or personnel that will be used to achieve them. DC requires your advocacy for data disaggregation, for English learner guidelines reform, and for school climate surveys, all of which will help DC reach its ambitious proficiency targets. Maryland, in contrast to DC and Virginia, already has school climate and more innovative measures as their accountability measures, which certainly help prevent racial discrimination toward APIs. Maryland needs lobbying for more active outreach toward English learners, where a significant percentage of certain counties yell speak primarily an API language. It's more than important for stakeholder input to be provided in these next few months as the plan is finalized. since one's influence in these next 2 years will impact our children's and grandchildren's lives for decades to come. After all, even the controversial No Child Left Behind Act lasted for 14 years.
And I'm just going to give a call to action for the DMV area in general. So we encourage you to read more about ESSA and to read more about read specifically the DC, Maryland, and Virginia state plans, and also maybe to look at other state plans of states with high AAPI populations and how they handle their AAPI student populations, for example, California and Hawaii. We also encourage you to speak at state boards' public meetings and to submit public comments, and sign up for the ESSA stakeholder list provided by the Southeast Asia Resource Action Center. Also, we encourage you to attend local school board meetings, and at these meetings, push for data disaggregation, English learner guidelines reforms, translation services for the public meetings themselves, and school quality factors that support safe school climates. Also, get involved with your local advocacy organizations. They're doing this work already and are looking for more people to help educate and inform others. And advocate through your school administrators or teachers you trust. Since you know these people well enough, it will be less intimidating than attending a school board meeting where you might not know anyone at all.
Let's say you show up to one of the stakeholder committee meetings for Maryland that Michelle mentioned, or you find yourself ready to submit a public comment on the Virginia Board of Education website. And you wonder, well, webinar presenters, what do I say now? We have some guidance for that as well. In short, what we would like to ask for is to ensure that schools insert the city or state that you live in have the capacity to serve AAPI students with high quality, disaggregated data, resources for English language learner students, and a safe, caring school climate in the implementation of the Every Student Succeeds Act. This is a concise ask with specific policy language, and we think that this ask should be incorporated into whatever comment you decide to submit. Other questions that we'd like for you to consider when crafting your comment or your contribution to any sort of discussion is, what is your story? How are any of these issues with disaggregated data, English language learners, or a safe, caring school climate, how are these personally relevant to you? Also, what is the situation in your community, and what data represents that? We have an example for you. So let's say that I am a mother of a student who practices Sikhism in Fresno, California. This is an example of a story that we crafted, but even though we created this story, it still speaks to the real life experiences of some AAPI communities. As the mother of an Indian elementary school student who practices Sikhism and attends school in this district, it deeply hurts and scares me that my child is threatened and harassed at school for wearing a turban. According to a study done in 2014 by the Sikh Coalition, 67% of turban Sikh youth in Fresno are bullied. All students, regardless of their religion or what they wear, deserve a learning environment in which they feel safe and cared for. In short, I ask that schools in Fresno, California have the capacity to serve AAPI students with high-quality disaggregated data, resources for English language learner students, and a safe, caring school climate in the implementation of the Every Student Succeeds Act. As you can see, this story incorporates all of the different elements we talked about: a personal, compelling story backed by community data that shows the significance of this issue and why it matters, and lastly, a concise ask that very clearly states how this relates to ESSA and what the school district or state education agency can do.
Thanks, Anna. And just to finish off, we would like to thank a few specific people, starting off with Monica from NEA, who gave us that great explanation of ESSA and also provided us with further research and resources for us to use in this webinar. Kim Hall, who we heard from in her testimony from OCA, she also provided us with great resources and further information about education policy. Justin Snudad from Kapal for helping us a lot with the programming and the logistic aspects of this webinar. And then finally, I'd like to thank Suvan from CIRAC with all of his technological support Without him, we would not be able to figure out any of these polls and things. And so, if you would like to learn more, this webinar will be available on YouTube later on, and you can also access our slides here if you weren't able to join us for this webinar. So once again, thank you all for joining us, and we hope you have a great rest of the night. I guess if you guys have questions or comments, you can type them in the webinar chat, if there are any.
Well, I think what we wanted to do too is if you all actually have questions or comments later on, we're going to take the slide back to our email addresses, and feel free to email any of us any additional questions. Also, when folks were RSVPing for this webinar, there were a lot of questions about webinars on other states, and please feel free to email either me or Suvan to get connected on webinars on other states. We are planning on having a webinar on Hawaii state plan as well as California state plan. If you'd like for us to do a webinar for a specific state, we'd love to work with you on that. So yes, thank you so much again for joining us on this really important webinar, and we'd love to stay engaged with you. So hopefully please stay in touch. Thank you so much.